Once upon a time, in a small village called Aim, there lived two brothers called Andrew and Peter. Andrew was very handsome and blessed with a beautiful singing voice as well, while Peter wasn't as handsome as his brother Andrew. The reason was because when Peter was a child, she was involved in a domestic accident where oil splashed on his face, leaving him with a nasty scar on his face, which wasn't pleasant to look at. Everyone loved and admired Andrew, but Peter, who was the younger brother, was usually ignored. They were brothers, but as time went on, Andrew became very proud and arrogant because of the constant praises from women in the village. She stopped going out with his brother and was ashamed to be seen anywhere with Peter. However, Peter knew the reason why Andrew kept his distance, and it hurt him so much. But eventually, she learned how to enjoy his own company. His parents didn't make things easier because whenever a guest or visitor came to their house, they would always tell Peter to go inside and stay hidden until their guests left. Almost every night, Peter would cry his eyes out and beg God to take his life. She was ashamed to look at the mirror because of how she looked. Peter lived as a servant at home because his parents would prefer to send him on errands rather than send his elder brother, Andrew. One day, Peter went to fetch some water at the village stream. On his way back home, she saw an old man on the path that led to his house. The old man looked very tired as she sat down by the roadside with a big pot of water by his side. The sun was scorching that day, and the old man looked like he hadn't eaten or rested for hours. Peter greeted the man and walked past him, but she felt sorry for the old man, so she turned around. Peter kept his own pot of water safely hidden beside a big tree and offered to help the man carry his water. The man thanked Peter for his generosity and kindness and stood up to lead Peter to where she lived. She was very old and couldn't walk without a stick, and this made Peter wonder how the old man carried the big pot of water all by himself to where she had previously met him. But Peter didn't say anything. She followed the old man patiently with the pot of water on his head. They walked and walked until they got to an isolated hut in the forest. The hut was surrounded by towering trees, and it looked like no one had lived there for years. When they arrived at the hut, Peter kept the pot of water for the old man. But as soon as she was about to leave, the old man said to him, "You have a very good heart. Many people saw me stranded by the roadside, but none of them came to my aid. Because of your kindness, I will grant your deepest heart's desire." The old man gave Peter a special cream wrapped in a rare leaf. "Take this cream. It is a magical cream made from a blend of many special herbs. Apply it on your face when you want to go out, and you will look handsome as the morning sun. Any woman you kiss on the lips with this cream on your face will forever see you as a star." Peter collected the magical cream and thanked the man. When she got home, she hid it in the roof of his room. But she was scared of using it because she didn't know the old man. A lot of women were attracted to Andrew. They would buy him all sorts of gifts and jewelry just to impress him and win his heart. But Andrew refused to settle down with any of them. She enjoyed being chased and wanted to continue enjoying the benefits of being chased. One day, a very beautiful and wealthy woman came for Andrew's hand in marriage. She had brought with her a lot of gifts and provisions. As they sat in the compound discussing the marriage plans, Peter showed up. She had been sent to the market to get some things and had no idea there would be visitors in the compound. Immediately Andrew saw him. She screamed at Peter in anger. "You ugly thing! Why do you want to spoil this beautiful day of mine with your ugly face? Everyone looked at Peter and started laughing. She couldn't bear the shame, so she ran into his room and started crying bitterly. While she was crying, she looked up and remembered the magical cream which the old man had given him weeks ago. Without thinking twice, she took the cream and rubbed a bit of it on his face. Immediately after applying the cream, she felt a strange aura of confidence, but she was still deeply hurt, so she fell asleep. The next day, Peter woke up and went into the forest to fetch some firewood as usual. On his way to the forest, she found it very strange that all the women she passed were looking at him. It made him very uncomfortable, and she felt something must be wrong with his face. Before, people didn't look at him twice, but now everyone was so focused on him. She wanted to run back home, but she knew what to run back home, but she knew what to expect if she didn't return home with some firewood. So she continued his journey into the forest. After fetching the firewood, she tried to lift it onto his head when a very beautiful woman showed up out of nowhere. Her name was Ada. "Let me help you," she said. Peter was shocked because this would be the first time anyone would talk to him or offer assistance to him. "Are you talking to me?" Peter asked, surprised. "Of course. Why would an angel like you be carrying such a heavy load all by yourself?" Peter was stunned. "An angel? Me? Or should I call you a god instead? Your beauty is unlike anything I've ever seen before," Ada added. Peter couldn't believe his ears. It was the first time anyone had ever told him she was handsome. She watched as Ada carried the firewood on her shoulder, and she led the way to his house. The birds chirped sweetly in the background as they walked together, and for the first time in years, Peter felt a sense of joy he could not explain. While they walked, Andrew told Peter that he liked her and wanted to know her better. Peter felt like she was dreaming. Even the worst women in the village had always avoided her. Yet here was Andrew, asking to be her lover. The moonlight illuminated their path as they walked, casting long shadows on the ground. When they arrived at her compound, Ada was seated outside the house, fanning herself with a large woven palm fan. She watched closely as Andrew kept the firewood beside the fire. Before Andrew left, he hugged Peter and kissed her on the forehead. When Ada saw this, she became very jealous. Despite the fact that she had all the women in the village running after her, she felt envious that Andrew, just one man, was interested in her sister. Ada went to Peter and started asking her where and how she knew Andrew, but Peter ignored her. This made Ada even angrier. When Peter entered her room, she remembered the cream the old man gave her. She realized that the cream must be the reason why all the women were suddenly attracted to her. The next day, Peter rubbed the cream again before she went to the stream to fetch water. She found Andrew waiting for her. "I knew you'd come here, so I waited for you. Let me help you with the water," he said, his voice warm and gentle. As time went on, Peter grew fonder of Andrew. He was a very kind and caring man, but Peter was scared. She wasn't sure if Andrew loved her because of the supernatural beauty the magical cream gave her, or because of her true self. Meanwhile, Ada was consumed by hatred and jealousy. She couldn't bear to see Andrew always around Peter, despite having many women running after her. Ada vowed to snatch Andrew away from Peter. The next time Andrew accompanied Peter home from the market, Ada moved closer to him and started trying to seduce him. However, Andrew was not enticed at all. He was unmoved by her actions. "Leave that ugly girl and take me. I promise I'll make you happy. What would it take to win your heart? Tell me, and I'll do it," Ada said, her voice trembling with desperation. But Andrew insisted that Peter was the woman he wanted. Whenever Ada looked at her sister, the nasty scars were still visible. But whenever any woman looked at her, they saw a very handsome man, even more attractive than Ada. Driven by frustration, Ada decided to monitor Peter. She was convinced that Peter was up to something. That was the only explanation for why all the women who had disliked her before suddenly wanted her. One morning, Ada woke up very early and stayed at Peter's window, peeping through to see what Peter would do. She watched as Peter unsuspectingly took the cream from where she had hidden it and rubbed it on her face. Then Ada observed where Peter hid the cream. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the compound as birds chirped melodiously in the background. When Peter left for the forest to fetch firewood, Ada sneaked into her room and took the cream. She believed the cream must be the reason why all the women in the village suddenly loved Peter. Ada rubbed some of the cream on her face. But immediately after applying it, she started feeling a burning sensation. Her face grew hotter and hotter with each passing minute. The pain became unbearable, and Ada quickly ran to wash her face. When her parents saw her, they were shocked. The cream had completely destroyed her face, leaving it worse than Peter's. It was red, discolored, and badly burned. When Peter returned from the market with Andrew, as usual, she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw her elder sister. Ada's face was so red, discolored, and burnt. Immediately, Ada saw Peter. She started pleading for forgiveness. "Please forgive me. I'm deeply sorry for what I did to you. Please forgive me," Ada begged, tears streaming down her cheeks. Peter was confused. She had never seen Ada apologize before. "What did you do? I've always made peace with the way you treated me, and I still love you. Even though you treated me harshly, I still love you," Peter said, her voice filled with sincerity. Ada started weeping seriously. She held Peter's hands and confessed her sins. Ada told Peter and their parents that when they were little, their parents had loved and cherished her so much. They gave her everything she wanted because she was their only child. But when Peter was born, it was as if all the love and attention shifted to Peter. Everyone focused on Peter because she was more handsome as a child. This made Ada very jealous. Out of envy, Ada had placed a pan of hot oil on top of the cupboard and told Peter to go and bring it, knowing full well that Peter was little and that the hot oil would pour on her. Ada confessed that she did it on purpose so that she would be the only attractive child and everyone would stop treating Peter specially. Everyone was shocked by Ada's confession. Her parents were deeply disappointed in her. But Peter, with her kind heart, told Ada that she had forgiven her a long time ago because it was in the past. All the women in the village avoided Ada because of how burnt her face was. And after hearing what she did to her own sister, they disliked her even more. Ada lived in pain and regret for the rest of her life. Peter, however, got married to Andrew. After Andrew kissed her, she no longer needed the cream. They had beautiful children and lived happily ever after. The lesson we can draw from this story is that envy and jealousy are destructive forces that can lead to actions with irreversible consequences. Instead of comparing ourselves to others, we should learn to appreciate our own unique qualities and support those around us. True beauty lies in kindness, love, and a pure heart, not in outward appearances. Furthermore, parents must ensure that love and care are equally distributed among their children, as favoritism can create resentment, jealousy, and division within the family. Thank you so much for watching my channel. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Stay tuned for more captivating and inspiring stories coming your way. Make sure to subscribe and explore other interesting videos on the channel. See you in the next one. She secretly followed Zara, a middle-aged woman in her late 40s, through the misty paths of Akur because she wanted to find out where Zara is always going to at the early hours of the morning, and she was surprised at what she found. Fatima was a popular food vendor at the bustling village market of Akur, where the scent of spices lingered in the air. Her food was legendary, whispered about in every corner of the town. People came from far and wide to eat her food. Sometimes, when there are so much customers at Zara's store, all the dishes will be left dirty and unattended to, and then people will line up to wash their dishes before they can get served at the store. Fatima would tell them, "Make sure you wash your plates. Wash the plates and bring them before I serve you. If you come with a dirty plate, I will not serve you." And you will see the customers hesitant, running to wash their dishes just to have a taste of Fatima's testing meal. Zara, with her imposing figure, sharp eyes, and a vibrant green scarf she always wore, ruled over her kitchen like a queen. Her dishes were truly delicious. You can never have a taste of Fatima's meal without coming back the next day. But there was a mystery that surrounded Fatima's restaurant, a secret that piqued the curiosity of her colleagues because they wondered why Fatima's restaurant was always crowded with customers to the extent that they will have to line up and even wash their own dishes before they get served. Whenever Zara is cooking, there's a particular pot she is very strict about. She will warn all her staff not to open that pot, and whenever she's cooking, she's always standing in front of that pot or sitting close to that pot or sitting close to that pot just to make sure that nobody opens the pot. Only Zara opens and closes that particular pot. Also, every day, there's a particular place Fatima always visits before daybreak. Another food vendor, Mariam, who sells food on the same street where Fatima's restaurant is located, decided to find out what exactly Fatima does to attract customers because she no longer makes sales. All her customers have gone to Fatima's store. Nobody visits her restaurant anymore. She was told by one of Fatima's staff that Fatima is always standing in front of a particular pot whenever that pot is on the fire, and that she always leaves early hours of the morning to a particular place and comes back before daybreak. So, Mariam decided to find out what exactly and where exactly Zara visits. The next day, Mariam secretly followed Fatima, tiptoeing behind her through narrow alleys and overgrown trails, just to ensure that she discovers where she always visits in the morning. Unfortunately, she failed because all of a sudden, she lost track of Fatima's movement among the shadowy paths and just gave up. Fatima's restaurant continued to flourish and boom with more and more customers coming from east, west, north, and south just to have a taste of her meal. The demand of customers became higher, and she needed more hands at the restaurant. She employed a young girl called Salma, a curious and determined 20-year-old. Salma was intelligent, curious, and determined. On the day she resumed, Zara strictly warned her, just as she has always warned the other staff of that particular pot, that she should not go close to that pot, and she should not open that pot. One day, Salma asked one of the staff at the restaurant why Zara always gave a strict warning not to open that pot. And her colleague said, "I don't know. Ever since I've been working in this restaurant, nobody dares to open this pot. So please, Salma, in order not to buy Fatima's trouble, don't try to go close or open her pot." Salma became more curious and wondered what exactly was inside that pot that forbade Zara from allowing anyone to open the pot. She asked herself, what exactly is she hiding in that pot that is so precious? I am Salma, and I must find out what exactly is in that pot. One day, Salma almost opened the pot, but Zara caught her, her sharp eyes blazing with anger, and was very angry at Salma. She seriously warned her not to ever come close again. But this did not stop Salma's curiosity. She was this kind of girl that is determined to find out something if she puts her mind to it. Salma discovered that there's a particular place Zara visits every morning. Early one misty morning, she decided to follow Zara secretly again to find out where she is always going to. Salma was shocked and surprised at what she had just discovered. She just found out where Fatima always visited, but she decided not to say a word because she still needed to find out what exactly is in that pot that Zara always covers. "My name is Salma," she said, "and I always find anything I want to find." One busy day at the restaurant, with customers buzzing around like flies, Salma was thinking of a way to distract Zara from the front of this pot. Then she quickly went to Zara and started shouting, "Madam, madam, 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 the shop is on fire! The shop is on fire! Come, 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 come and see! The shop is on fire!" Out of fear, Zara was shocked and distracted. She quickly hurried to the front of the shop to see the fire outbreak, her sandals clapping noisily on the floor, forgetting the pot on the fire. Salma seized the opportunity. She tiptoed to the pot. Her heart was trembling. Her hands were shaking. Salma lifted the lid, expecting to find a treasure of culinary wonders. But what she saw made her scream in horror. Instead of the delicious dishes, the pot contained a liquid dark and ominous, blood boiling inside the pot. Salma started shouting. The commotion drew everyone's attention, and soon the entire restaurant was staring at the open pot of blood boiling on the fire. Fatima returned, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Then she realized that she had been caught, and she started confessing. But before she started confessing, Salma had already started narrating how she discovered that Fatima always visited a mortuary where she gets liquid used in washing dead bodies to cook her meal. She also visited a native doctor who always gave her a substance to pour into that pot so that substance can turn into blood. The more the blood boiled on the fire, the more customers came trooping in and out of the restaurant. Fatima started narrating how she started the food business at the initial stage and how there were no sales. Sometimes she would come to the shop, and for 2 days she wouldn't make sales, and all her food would get spoiled and wasted. She really needed money to take care of her children, so she decided to go into diabolical means. That is why she uses water used in washing dead bodies and the boiling blood from the native doctor to cook just so she can start making sales. Ever since then, she has been making a lot of sales. The villagers were so mad at Zara after listening to her confession because she had been poisoning them with mortuary water and deadly blood. They started chasing her. They chased Zara with the intention of killing her, and she ran into the evil forest, her vibrant green scarf trailing behind her. To this day, nobody knows where Fatima is. They destroyed her restaurant. They also thank Salma for her bravery and courage because if not for that, nobody would have known the source of Fatima's delicious meals, nor would they have known that they had actually been feeding with mortuary water. That was how the story of Fatima, the food vendor, ended. From that day on, the people of Akur became very conscious of how they eat and where they eat. Likewise, to you two watching this story, be very cautious of where you eat because you never can tell how that meal was made. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the story of Fatima and her mysterious restaurant. Remember, the lessons from Akur remind us to stay vigilant about where and how our meals are prepared. Stories like these uncover hidden truths and help us appreciate the value of integrity in everyday life. If you enjoyed this tale and want more captivating stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Together, let's continue exploring fascinating tales that entertain and enlighten. Mr. Kofi set on his journey, and Amina was behind him secretly, her heart racing with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Kofi didn't realize that he was being followed. After a short while, Kofi arrived home, a small, dimly lit building at the edge of the village. He used his key to open the creaky wooden door and walked inside his house. Mrs. Amina lived in the village of Z. There is a popular market called Z, bustling with traders and colorful stalls. In that market, there lived a man called Mr. Kofi, who was a meat seller. At Un Market, Z was a peaceful community until Mr. Kofi arrived. Kofi was a man in his early 30s, known for his reserved demeanor. He had no wife or children, so he lived alone in his modest home. He sold the largest pieces of meat for the cheapest prices, displaying them neatly on his wooden table covered with a stained, faded cloth. Everyone in the village majorly buys from Mr. Kofi. He arrives at the market with bags of meat, carried on a rickety cart, and he sells all of them before the day ends. This made other meat sellers in the market very envious of him, and at the same time, they were surprised. They wondered where he could get such quality meat and sell it at that cheap price. The strangest fact about Mr. Kofi is what he does with his money. Kofi makes tons of bags of money from his meat sales, but he never eats good food or even wears clean or new clothes. With all the money he makes, he still wears rags. Yes, rags. For someone that makes that kind of money as Mr. Kofi, this caught the attention of one other meat seller in the market called Mrs. Amina. Mrs. Amina knew that he makes a lot of money and was surprised at the way he takes care of himself. So she was determined to find out what Mr. Kofi does with his money. At the close of the market one fateful day, Kofi packed up his cart with his leftover items and set to head home. Meanwhile, Mrs. Amina had been waiting all the time so she could follow Mr. Kofi. Mr. Kofi set on his journey and Amina was behind him secretly. Kofi didn't realize that he was being followed. After a short while, Kofi arrived home, where faint candlelight flickered through the cracks in his windows. He used his key to open the door and walked inside his house. Mrs. Amina then began to peep inside Kofi's home through the outside window, her breath fogging up the cold glass. Mrs. Amina looked inside the house, and the house appeared to be smelling, with piles of old newspapers and strange objects scattered around. Then Mr. Kofi walked up to a very big black pot in the corner of the dimly lit kitchen. He opened it, and steam escaped, filling the room with an odd smell. Ah, I think I need to supply more meats because I'm running out of supply, Mr. Kofi said, and then he closed the pot with a loud clang, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Amina was curious to know what is inside that black pluck pot. It could be that the pot is what is supplying him with so many meats, she said to herself, clutching the edge of the window. She waited for Mr. Kofi to step out of the room. Immediately he stepped out of the room. Mrs. Amina walked into the house, her footsteps light against the creaking floorboards, and opened the pot. Hi guys, this is on Pleading with You. So please support my channel by clicking on the subscribe button. Turn on the notifications. I have realized that most of my audience watches my videos and never subscribes. Please be a part of my success and growth. Be a part of my growth and please support my channel by clicking on the subscribe button. Thank you. Let's go back to the story. Immediately she opened the pot. She heard Mr. Kofi shouting, "Who is there?" And she quickly ran back, her heart pounding like a drum. She ran as fast as she could back to her own house, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she had just seen. The next day, she decided to keep a close eye on Mr. Kofi, hoping to uncover more about his strange behavior. The next day at the market, Mrs. Amina tried to act normal, but she couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling. She kept glancing over at Mr. Kofi, who was busy selling his meats and chatting cheerfully with customers. He seemed to be in a good mood, smiling and chatting with customers as usual. As the day went on, Mrs. Amina couldn't help but feel more curious about what she had seen in Mr. Kofi's house. She knew she had to find out more, even if it meant putting herself in danger. That evening, Mr. Kofi packed up his store and headed home. Mrs. Amina followed him again. This time she was more careful, making sure to stay hidden in the shadows, her heart thudding with both fear and determination. When Mr. Kofi reached his house, Mrs. Amina watched from a distance as he went inside. She crept closer to the window and peered in. Kofi was in the kitchen, chopping up what looked like pieces of meat, humming a strange tune under his breath. She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that this meat looked very strange, just like what she had seen yesterday. Suddenly, Kofi turned and looked directly at the window. Mrs. Amina ducked down quickly, her heart racing. Had he seen her? She thought to herself. She held her breath, praying that he had not seen her. After a few minutes, she dared to peek again. Kofi was no longer in the kitchen. She heard footsteps approaching the window and panicked. Without thinking, she ran away again, not stopping until she reached her house. Breathing heavily, she locked her door and sat down to think. She knew she had to tell someone about what she had seen, but who would believe her? Mr. Kofi was well liked by everyone. Who would she tell? Who would believe her story? And then she decided to confide in her best friend, Mrs. Binta. The next day, she went to Mrs. Binta and told her, "My friend, I am in a big problem. I am in a big problem. I am confused. You remember the meat seller, Mr. Kofi, at the market? I followed him to his house yesterday. You won't believe what my eyes saw." "But who will I tell?" And Mrs. Binta asked, "My friend, tell me, what did you see in Mr. Kofi's house?" Mrs. Amina narrated everything she saw. Mrs. Binta was shocked, but agreed that they needed to find out more before going to the authorities. Together, they came up with a plan. They would take turns following Mr. Kofi and gathering evidence of his suspicious activities. Mrs. Amina would follow him one day and Mrs. Binta the next. For the next few days, they followed Kofi closely. They noticed that he always went to a particular place at night, but they couldn't summon the courage to follow him that night. Why would a man who is selling meat at the market always visit a particular place at night? They thought to themselves. One night it was Mrs. Binta's turn to follow Kofi. She watched as he left the market and headed home. She stayed hidden, keeping a safe distance. When Kofi entered his house, Mrs. Binta quietly crept up to the window. She saw Kofi in the kitchen, as usual, chopping up meat, but this time he seemed to be talking to himself. She strained to hear what he was saying. "I must find another one soon," Kofi muttered. "The supply is running low again." Mrs. Binta gasped. She quickly pulled out her phone and took a few pictures of Kofi with the meat. Then she hurried back to Mrs. Amina to share what she had found. Mrs. Amina and Mrs. Binta knew they needed more concrete evidence before they could go to the authorities. They decided to set a trap for Kofi. The next day, Mrs. Binta approached Kofi at the market. "Mr. Kofi," she said sweetly, "I've heard you have the best meat in town. I would like to place a special order for a large amount of meat for a big family party." Kofi smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Binta. How much do you need?" Mrs. Binta gave him an amount that she knew would require him to restock his supply. "Can you have it ready by tomorrow evening?" "Absolutely," Kofi replied. "I will make sure it's the best meat you've ever had." That evening, Mrs. Amina and Mrs. Binta followed Kofi again. As they suspected, he left his house late at night carrying a large sack. They followed him to the outskirts of the village, where he disappeared into the woods. They waited for what felt like hours. Finally, Kofi emerged from the woods, dragging the heavy sack behind him. He made his way back to his house, and the two women watched as he entered. They knew they had to act fast. They called the police and told them everything. The police were skeptical at first, but Mrs. Binta showed them the pictures she had taken, and they agreed to investigate. The next day, the police arrived at Kofi's house with a warrant. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer. They broke down the door and entered, finding the house empty. They searched the house thoroughly and found the big black pot. Inside, they discovered the chopped up remains of several bodies. The police were horrified and immediately called for backup. Meanwhile, Kofi was at the market selling his meat as usual. The police arrived and arrested him in front of everyone. The villagers were shocked and couldn't believe what they were seeing. Kofi was taken to the police station for questioning. At first, he denied everything, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Eventually, he broke down and confessed to everything. He told the police that he had been killing people and selling their meat to the townspeople. He claimed that he was a very rich man in his own village, and that the only way he could make money was by selling human meat. He claimed that this was why he always looked dirty and rough. just so nobody would suspect him. He said he sent all the money he made to his wife and children in his village. Kofi insisted he did it to make more money, but his words shocked everyone. The entire town was in disbelief as they listened to the details of his horrific acts. The families of the victims were devastated, and the townspeople felt betrayed. Kofi was sentenced to life in prison. The people were relieved that Kofi was behind bars, but the horror of his crimes haunted them for a long time. They vowed to be more vigilant in the future and to support each other in times of need. In the months following Kofi's arrest, the town slowly began to heal. Mrs. Amina and Mrs. Binta were hailed as heroes for their bravery in uncovering the truth. The village of Z learned a valuable lesson about trust and vigilance. They realized that evil can sometimes hide behind a friendly face, and they vowed to always look out for one another. As for Kofi, he remained in prison, haunted by the ghosts of his past and the weight of his crimes. He would never be able to undo the harm he had caused. Thank you for joining me on this gripping journey through another thrilling story. As always, remember to stay curious and vigilant, because the most unexpected tales often hide in plain sight. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps me bring you even more amazing stories. See you in the next adventure. Bye for now.